Good morning, Sunnyvale. We'll get started in just a few moments. Good morning. Just be just a moment before we get started. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, Sunnyvale. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Thanks for joining me again this week for my weekly virtual office hour address. This is the 91st edition of the weekly office hours, and I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy. We've now reached 634 days since the March 16th, 2020 county health order started the whole shelter in place in an attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. 21 months ago, I converted my weekly office hours into these virtual live stream addresses and haven't missed a week since. And now of course I follow up these live stream sessions with an in-person meetings with people on Bean Scene at Bean Scene on Murphy Avenue. If you're interested in meeting up, just email me and you can reserve 15 minutes or 30 minutes and or just drop in if you have a quick question. So that's actually been, I've been doing that for over 5 years now, and it's very beneficial. Just being able to talk to people. But people say they're happy to have these live stream addresses and hearing from their mayor each week. These weekly sessions allow me to reach out to a lot more people. And talk about, give you some updates, give you some words of encouragement, and you know. Pass on some upcoming news and answer some of your questions. And I think that's one of the best things about this is, people either watch live or watch, time shifted. But I think it's a way to stay in contact with a lot more people than I can just meet with at my office hours and on Murphy Avenue. But so thanks for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale. A few months ago, I started changing my background art every week. And all this is art provided by artists from the Sunnyvale Art Club. Today's piece is also from Chris MacDonough, the same person who provided last week's piece. And this week's piece is called Reflections in Vermont. So if you're interested in purchasing that piece, just reach out to me and I'll put you in contact with the artist, and hopefully that will work out. Conceivably, some of the art that I've been showcasing would make a good holiday gift for someone in your life, so or to hang on your own wall. But let's go ahead and get started and talk about what's happened at the federal, state, county, and city level over the last 2 weeks. Last Tuesday, our city council met, and the meeting started off with an update from the Santa Clara County Housing or Office of Supportive Housing, and their director Consuelo Rodriguez or Hernandez Consuelo Hernandez, gave some info on the Bella Vista site and the Crestview site. So these are home key conversions of existing hotels into permanent housing for the Crestview site, and at least initially transitional housing, and then ultimately permanent housing for the Bella Vista site in Santa Clara. So it was good to get a quick update. I wish it had been more informative, but it at least gave us some update on those projects. As for the main meeting, council approved the Java Drive Road Diet. So this was part of our active transportation plan. We ended up removing, basically directing staff to remove one lane in each direction along Java Drive, and that's between Matilda, so Matilda on the west and Crossman Avenues on the east, and ultimately we'll create buffered bike lanes. So there'll be a bike lane and then a striped section, and then room for cars going through, and then of course the light rail down the center of that area. And so ultimately, we had a lot of people come and speak in favor of it. There are definitely some final design things that need to be completed, but we do have grant funding to complete that. And I think I think it'll make that, as we especially look at Moffett Park, the future of Moffett Park, I think it'll make transportation there a lot more, a lot easier for those people who want to bike, and just kind of make it a better community overall as we look at adding housing and office and retail in that whole area. And then on Wednesday of last week, the White House announced that the first person in the U.S. Had contracted the Omicron variant of COVID-19. And that person was here in California. And so there's been a lot of discussions about the Omicron variant, and California was the first one that became the first state in the nation to have an identified case. And part of that is, I think, the amount of testing that we do on all of our positive cases. And so, Dr. Fauci basically said that it was someone who had returned to San Francisco after being in South Africa. So basically during the Thanksgiving break, but the person had been vaccinated but hadn't received their booster yet, and was experiencing mild symptoms, and that conceivably is partially because of the vaccine. And then as we hear more and more about the Omicron variant, it seems to be more transmissible, but it doesn't seem to be as deadly. So definitely we'll see as we get more information on that as far as that's concerned. But it was only a matter of time before we started seeing that in the U.S. And then later Wednesday, Governor Newsom had his press conference urging everyone, of course, to get their vaccine shot, get their booster, all that in relationship to that same announcement. On Thursday, President Biden unveiled kind of stricter COVID-19 travel rules. So starting this past Monday, so starting a few days ago this week, international travelers coming into the U.S., including Americans, must take a COVID test no more than 1 day before they leave. And that's regardless of their vaccination status or anything of that nature. So ultimately, it's making sure that people, aren't testing positive just before they get on the plane. Of course, there is, the question of how long it takes for symptoms to start to appear and all that, but at least for that 24-hour period prior to coming back into the U.S., it reduces the potential risk of bringing in the Omicron variant or any other variants if they've been exposed to COVID. And then as far as last weekend, last weekend was a very busy weekend. The annual downtown tree lighting happened on Murphy Avenue, and so I saw there was music, there were singers and some dancing. Definitely it was a great turnout. Lots of people happy to be there. It was 2 years ago. It was pouring. It was pre-COVID and pouring and pretty cold on Murphy Avenue, and it's actually uh, last Saturday night was almost a perfect December evening from a Sunnyvale standpoint. It was not too cold, but the skies were clear, and definitely no rain. So much appreciated, and it was good. We had music, we had dancers, we had lots of people on Murphy Avenue enjoying outdoor dining, and one of our new banks that are about to open, City National Bank, is actually providing free photos for residents and their families. So it was actually good from that standpoint to kind of celebrate that day with a memento. Uh, and then after, so that was the tree lighting was around 6 p.m. And then at 7:30 p.m., the Caltrain Holiday Train ended up coming to Sunnyvale for a quick 20-minute visit. And the holiday train was really impressive. It was decorated with about 75,000 lights. So it was lots of flashing and glittering, and then of course there was snow. There was the Salvation Army brass band was there. There were carolers there. Lots of good activity, and Santa, Mrs. Claus, Frosty, Rudolph. They were all came off the train to pose for photos with families, and I think it was a lot of fun. A lot of people heard from a lot of residents who really enjoyed the holiday train, and usually that comes to us on Sunday nights, and was happy that finally it came on a Saturday night, especially the same night as our tree lighting. So hopefully that will be the tradition going forward. I've definitely already talked to Caltrain and thanked them for that, and hopefully that will become an ongoing tradition. And then on Tuesday of this week, council met. It was a pretty busy afternoon and evening. We started off with a discussion on outdoor dining, and so this is we've been extending the outdoor dining in parking lots, as well as closing the 100 block of South Murphy Avenue several times now, and so this time we extended that closure and the outdoor dining in parking lots to September 30th, 2022, and that was unanimously approved by City Council, which wasn't a big surprise from my standpoint. Ultimately, we will be kicking off a study session or study issue early in the spring, in the winter spring, and that should be done by September 30th. So that will that will come back to council with the final direction on what the plans are for Murphy Avenue, as well as kind of the parklets that are around the city, in the parking areas of multiple locations. And I think as long as COVID is somewhat in our communities, I think people definitely feel more comfortable eating outside, depending upon the weather, of course. We had some rain earlier this week and some chilly weather, but I still see people sitting outside, and a lot of the restaurants have added umbrellas and tents. So there are, adding that outdoor environment definitely makes people feel a lot safer. So, is happy that council approved that unanimously. And then yesterday, the Senate adopted a bipartisan deal that kind of paves the way for lawmakers to raise the debt ceiling. And so, ultimately, this will allow Congress to prevent we'll say, catastrophic default ahead of the fast approaching deadline of December 15th. And if you remember, in October, there was somewhat of a political stalemate in the Congress, and it really almost pushed us to some sort of financial brink. But definitely they finally reached an agreement, but they only did a short-term increase, and kind of pushed it off to December 15th. So they only pushed it off for about 2 months. Luckily, they've been negotiating and finally came up with this compromise, which will go to President Biden's desk long before the final December 15th deadline, but it looks like it's going to postpone the next round of increasing the debt at least until after the 2022 midterm elections. So we're at least given, let's say, a 1 year reprieve, and then we'll see what happens during those elections, of course. But from that standpoint, that's kind of the next step, and elite from a federal standpoint, making sure that we don't stop paying people in the middle of the holidays is really critical. So, it's kind of a preordained thing that it will be passed, but we keep always running towards that wall from a federal standpoint, and trying to make sure that things, everybody gets their fair share and fair say on what goes on, and then ultimately it moves forward. Sometimes that's tied to other bills. Sometimes that's lots of additional riders to make sure that the budget passes, or the debt ceiling passes. We'll see what happens, but at least it looks like we're safe until a year from now. Let's go ahead and get to the COVID numbers. So from a national standpoint, things are fairly stable. We now have 49.4 million cases, so we'll pass 50 million cases of COVID sometime in the next week. Nationally, we've had over 237 million people vaccinated with at least one dose. That's almost 84% of adults, and 72% of adults are fully vaccinated. So we just passed the threshold of 200 million people that are vaccinated in the U.S., which is good from that standpoint. Deaths, we're still having a large number of deaths related to COVID on a weekly basis. We had another 9,000 this week, and now have reached 790,000 deaths. So we'll be passing 800,000 sometime in the next week or two. From a state standpoint, we've had 4.8 million positive cases. We are reaching about 4,500 a day now. That's up a little from 400 a day last week. So it fluctuates somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 every week now, or every day, from a per day case count in California. But it's still one of the best case rates in the nation. So we have a lot to be proud of as far as that's concerned. And California's had over now 74,000 fatalities, another 500 just in the last week. So we are still seeing quite a few people passing away because of COVID. On a positive note, we've distributed over 600 million vaccines, over 1 million just in the last week. And as far as vaccines per state, we're still at number 11 on states with at least one shot, with residents with at least one shot, with 79% of our population having at least one shot. And at number 15, we were at 14, with residents that are fully vaccinated at 63%. So, a few states have been able to get into the communities and make sure that their residents are fully vaccinated. From a county, the county continues to do great job. Yesterday the county reported the cumulative cases have passed 153,000. That's up about 1,700 in the last week. That's about the same as we have about 1,500, 1,600 the last few weeks. We've had 918 deaths. That's 20 deaths in the last week after having no deaths last week. So we're still seeing a certain number of people passing away because of COVID, but 95% of our county's adults have had at least one dose, and 91.1% of those over 18 are fully vaccinated. And the number of people getting their boosters, the number of kids, and those over 5 between 5 and 17 getting their shots are really high. So it's actually positive from a county standpoint. I keep doing a lot of advocating on our city's behalf, at the county level with county supervisors and county health. As far as testing, the county is now doing testing twice a month at the senior center, and I did it about a week and a half ago, just after Thanksgiving. They'll be back here next Thursday on December 16th from 9:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. So all you need to do is go to sccfreetest.org and you can sign up there. Appointments are open until they're completely filled up, and so this is all appointment only as far as that's concerned. There's multiple locations around the county that the county's running to do that testing, but this is, I think trying to make it as convenient as possible is good from a county standpoint, and especially for our residents. And then as far as getting vaccinated, there's lots of pop-up locations to get your booster, to get your flu shot also around the county, and all you need to do is go to sccfreevax.org, and you can find one of the locations around the county that's available. Pretty much every day. There are county pop-ups moving from city to city. Next, I wanted to update you on some upcoming events. So tomorrow at the ice rink, and I've visited the ice rink several times over the last week or two, there will be robots on ice, and I think that was a lot of people were happy to see that 2 years ago when we had the ice rink, the first time the ice rink came to Sunnyvale. And pretty much all afternoon there will be events. So there's training, basically programming, robot training for Girl Scouts. So it's part of a STEM effort to bring more women and girls into the science industry. And so that was actually very positive. I helped put them in contact with multiple Girl Scout troops here in Sunnyvale, trying to make sure that we have some of our scouts get exposed to that. And then there are also, I think the big things that people want to see are the robots on ice, as well as the RC cars on ice. And there will be several demonstrations throughout the afternoon. I think there's like 3 demonstrations of each. So definitely consider dropping by, joining the fun. I think it'll be an interesting show, to say the least. And I know that considering that most of the home-based enthusiasts that are creating these robots, doing these RC cars for running on ice, have not had much to do because of COVID. And I think that there's a lot of them that are going to showcase some very interesting, to say the least, robots and their RC cars. So join that fun tomorrow. And then as far as upcoming council meetings, next Tuesday will be our final council meeting of the year, and it'll be most likely a long evening, a lot of things on our agenda. From a study session standpoint, which starts the meeting, we'll discuss possible revisions to our short-term rental laws. And that was in basically in response to the shooting that happened at the Airbnb earlier this year. And so we're looking at trying to make conceivably fines for those landlords that are doing short-term rentals that aren't following our rules. So that's one of the things that we'll be discussing at the study session before our general meeting. And then at the main meeting, we'll be doing a lot of different things. One of which was we'll finally officially declare Mason Fong's council seat vacant. And so that was within the first 30 days, and then establishing the process and kind of the schedule for making the appointment to replace him in the next 60 days. So it kind of lays out the interview, the application. So we're releasing that application, and then the interview dates at the end of January, and then the final appointment sometime between February 3rd and February 12th. And that allows us to basically appoint somebody for the rest of 2022, um, and then basically move to our district elections in November of 2022. So we saved the city having to run a replacement in June, which would have cost the city about $225,000. Or the other concept, of course, is if we'd run a special election, that would have been between 1.9 and 3.2 million, which would have been a complete waste of money to that degree. We'll also receive our 2020-2021 fiscal year-end report. So every year we basically finally it takes a lot of months for about 6 months. So the fiscal year always ends at the end of June, beginning of July, but it takes a lot of doing the final closeout of all the bills from last year, doing the final analysis, and then having the auditors come in and reevaluate everything. So we'll get that. Similar to our last meeting, where one of the things that we did at our last Tuesday meeting, which actually I didn't mention, was LinkedIn contributed converting, basically doing bike improvements along Maud Avenue. So between the Mountain View border, including the Mary Avenue, and kind of going farther east. One of the things that LinkedIn did was contribute all kinds of pedestrian and bicycle improvements along that corridor to make it safer for our residents, for their employees to go between the different buildings. One of the things that we'll be doing at this upcoming meeting on Tuesday is look at accepting a donation from Google for Moffett Park to improve some of their complete street signing and striping improvements for the bicycle lane. So they're giving back also. So it's always good to have some of these corporate entities within your city that want to give back and help fund, bike infrastructure, pedestrian changes, new lights, all those sorts of things to make your city, the city safer for our residents, as well as those employees that are actually doing active transportation, whether or not that's bikes or scooters or other things. And then finally, actually maybe not finally, council will be looking at approving the final design for the 6.5 acre park at the old AMD campus. So this was one of the things that when we work with Irvine to add the housing, and that's a mixture of, I think, about 150 condos as well as about 900 apartments. One of the things that whole area is needed parks, and so it was negotiating with them to say increasing the density so that we could add a large park next to all the redwoods along Duane. So right there near Lawrence Expressway, which actually helps the residents in San Miguel that didn't have a large park that was close to their residents. So it's actually positive. It's a win-win for the new people that will be living at that old AMD campus and all the housing. It gives them a large park to access, but also the other condos and the other single-family homes in that general neighborhood now have or will have a park that of their own that's very, very close. So it's positive, a lot of positive things from that standpoint. Let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. If you have any questions, just add them into the chat. As far as questions from this past week, Whitney asked, I'm an avid walker, and I found that if I don't push the pedestrian light 1 second before the overhead traffic lights turn, then the walk signal will not turn, and I'll have to wait until the next round of light cycles goes through. This is especially frustrating at El Camino and adds minutes to an unnecessary wait time, but it also happens all throughout the downtown area. Because I'm often with my toddler, I won't cross without a signal because cars simply don't pay attention to pedestrians. Is there a way to adjust the timing on signals? Pushing the buttons even a few seconds late shouldn't affect a pedestrian's ability to cross in time and safety. And so I understand your concern. This is a mixture of safety and traffic throughput issues, and it's also, depends upon kind of the age of the equipment. And when, and so this is all about the timing of lights. When somebody pushes a pedestrian crossing, normally it conceivably extends the light beyond what normally is there, because often there are sensors tracking how many cars are going through beyond a certain point, and then there's a maximum period of time. Um, but when a pedestrian hits that before the cars start going through, it immediately adds whatever the timing to cross that street is, and that varies from depending upon how many lanes there are, but it also then conceivably extends the amount of time that cars can be going through while pedestrians are in the crosswalk. And so it isn't easy, because it's like conceivably you want to make sure that traffic flow continues throughout the city at a normal pace. If the if the light was about to turn yellow, and amber, and people hit the walk signal, you don't want that to be extended extensively. And so that, it is kind of you need to show up before the light turns. I totally understand. I'm a runner, and I often change my route if I don't hit the button soon enough. So if I was going to go across the street, I'll end up going, as opposed to across the street in one direction, I'll end up going across the street in the other direction if I miss the light, if I miss the signal. It's not a simple sort of thing. There are a few lights, I think, along El Camino that will trigger late because they're held a lot longer. But in general, it's not safe, because a lot of cars look at that flashing signal before they start turning, and then if it all of a sudden it goes from don't walk to walk while they've already been given the green, there's also a possibility that they don't see that change. So it's mainly from a safety issue. There are a few intersections that if they're long, if the light is longer, that it's going, and it has to do with certain intersections we have better timing, better signals at. Conceivably, you hit the button there, and it will go ahead and go basically give you the walk signal. But that varies so much on the equipment that we have there, how old it is, and also how many lanes are there. So it's trying to keep traffic throughput going through your city at a reasonable amount, and as much as we make sure that it's safe for pedestrians to cross, we can't completely give in to, okay, they show up a lot later, they hit the button, and they still want they want to cross at this moment. So it's who's there first to a certain degree, and if you're not there when the light is changing. We're also looking at actually doing delays in certain locations that after a light goes red, and if people push the crosswalk button, it'll be red in all directions for a short period of time while the pedestrians start walking across on the walk signal, and then it'll turn green. So it actually lets people get farther out into the crosswalk before giving the green to the cars, to make sure that at least they see that there's pedestrians going through, instead of waiting to see that movement. So we're looking at other things to do add safety as far as that's concerned. Let's see. Pat asked any update on Target. So as I mentioned last week, they're very close to finishing. The problem is, they were going to open in December, or we were hoping they were going to open in December, but a lot of this has to do with staffing issues. And so from a staffing issue standpoint, when the store found the issues with their fireproofing, they moved all their staff to other locations, and this is the holidays, and that's one of the things that is a big question. Of a lot of stores have had issues of staffing, and so the concept of opening our store in the middle of December, trying to meet the staffing requirements here as well as the other stores was almost an impossibility. So, it looks like, in talking to city staff who've been talking to Target, they could have opened this in December, but it's not a permitting standpoint, it's not a construction standpoint, but it's a staffing issue that once we get into January, it'll be easier to move some of the people from the other stores during the holidays to our store, and so that's the current goal. Not really happy about that, but that's the way it is. Allison asked, any updates on City Line development? So yeah, lots of good news. One thing, City National Bank will be opening up in January, and so they're already giving back to the community in providing the free photos at the tree lighting last weekend. But just announced this week, Flash Stick Pub, and so this is a miniature golf outlet that's has mainly locations up in Washington State. They just leased 12,000 square feet across from Target. And so this will be miniature golf, and it's a mixture of food and beer and drinks, as well as, video games and foosball. And so activities for tech workers and families and kids. And so I think that'll be a good addition as far as City Line is concerned. And then Roadrunner Sports, a running apparel and shoes. They'll be coming in, and they'll be coming into that same building. So we have at least two new, one's in entertainment and one's clothes. So I think those will be good additions to downtown. Jenny asked, crows are really bad downtown. They make a mess. Is there anything that can be done? So definitely, we've been looking at what we can do with the crows, and especially over the last 2 years, I think it's gotten progressively worse. But I gave some things that I had found online that other cities are doing to the city manager about 2 weeks ago, and city staff is looking at several measures to try to get the crows to move on and not flock at Plaza del Sol and Murphy Avenue overnight. And I think that's the big thing is as long as there's not such a density of them, it won't be as bad. There'll always be a few stragglers, but it's what we can do. Hugo asked, I noticed that the bridge near Home Depot project, the Fair Oaks Bridge, the rehabilitation of Fair Oaks Bridge has been delayed until the spring. It was supposed to be December. Do you know what happened? So I'm still, I've talked to staff and they're getting the full information, but the quick answer is it looks like it has to do with supply chain issues, and that's been an ongoing issue for so many things. It delayed the opening of the Washington Park Swim Center. It looks like there's supply chain issues here, similar that are causing issues. So hopefully, and I'll figure out when I'll give a full report at a later meeting on what that issue is. But it's been an ongoing problem for a lot of different projects, and I hear that from not just our city but all the cities around us, and other groups that are doing construction, whether or not that's developers or PG&E or Caltrans, just not being able to get the equipment that they need for whatever that operation is, whether or not it's road maintenance or building actual buildings or in this case rehabilitation of our old Fair Oaks Bridge. Let's see if there are any other questions. Don't see any. So let me go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for joining me again this week. I'm always proud of our city, especially over the almost 2 years during COVID. This is the season of gratitude, and I just want to say I'm thankful for our caring residents who are always looking out for ways to help others in our community. The future is still uncertain. New issues come up almost every day, whether or not that's a new variant or new problems. But Your actions really do make a difference. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We are in this together. We'll get through this together. So thanks for listening. Have a good weekend. Take care. Goodbye.